Hello everyone, I'd like to discuss our current module, Module 3, where we look at research designs and program evaluation. But first, I guess it's important to understand where we've come from. So in Module 2, we looked at applying and developing logic models. And with the development of logic models, as you know, it's an important component of this class because we will use that to utilize that as a framework for our research project. And indeed, we look at first inputs, activities, outputs, and outcomes. But now in Module 3, where we look at the research design component, one of the important elements here is the cause and effect mechanism. So inherently built into the idea of the logic model is the idea of cause and effect. So what causes the outcome or the ultimate effects of what your research project aims to address? Without that information, without understanding the cause and effect, it's challenging to develop a logic model because we don't necessarily know what is going to play the biggest role or impact the outcome, and that's what we ultimately aim to achieve in the design of the logic model, is to examine the ultimate outcomes. Here also it's important to conceptualize, although we will go into this in subsequent weeks in a little bit more detail, is understanding of independent and dependent variables. For this particular week in Module 3 at least, we talk a little bit about that in more detail. However, I'm sure from your 603 class and other classes that you've had, you have an understanding of what independent and dependent variables are. One way to think about it, though, for the purposes of this class, is that the independent variables can be seen as the predictor variables, and the dependent variables can be seen as the outcome variables. And that's another way to examine the cause and effect relationship with your study. So this is an important component as we're building our logic model and as we're moving forward. In addition to that, next week and next week's module will look more in depth at the idea of performance measurement, and then also how that translates into performance management. But for this particular week, we have the Delancre, Jonas, and Holzer article, and in their article they examine the discrepancy between implementation and adoption of performance measures at the local level of government. And one of the reasons why this has been problematic, and not necessarily as much now as it had been years ago, but is based on the idea that a lot of governments have developed output measures to evaluate performance measurement, but not necessarily the outcome measures. And the outcome measures are more challenging to develop and more challenging to apply, whereas the output measures are really seen as, or can be seen as, efficiency measures. So the idea here, and as you have seen with the development of your logic model, is that we extend the analysis and development to include the outcomes as well as the outputs. And what you want to keep in mind with their particular article is that there's a discrepancy occurs between developing and using performance information that typically involves program adoption and program implementation. From their study, a number of jurisdictions had implemented performance measures, but the adoption measures were more likely to be predicated on the internal environment, whereas implementation elements were more predicated on the external environment. So as you read through that article, and I think it'll bring into the forefront what we're trying to understand in the analysis of performance measurement as it relates to program evaluation, and some of the challenges that exist in government and also the nonprofit arena when applying performance measurement to evaluate program effectiveness. Alright, so keep in mind that your assignment is due Sunday by midnight, and if you have any questions, feel free to contact me either by email or by telephone call. Alright, thanks.